Um, Hello. My name is Geoff Sobelle, and I'm an American theater artist from the United States. And I have been working in theater really all my life. And I work in something, I guess we call it physical theater,
Mm.
and making shows from nothing, from an idea. And I hope that no two shows are really that similar. Usually they're one thing very different from the next. And I also work very collaboratively. So I work very closely with other artists. And I believe that these projects are best when, we lean into one another. And therefore, my work spans from dance to visual art to, but it's always performance based, and uses a lot of magic and a lot of movement. My background is I studied physical theater at the
The
École Jacques
remaining movements
Lecoq
they'll
in
be learning
Paris,
during 2 years
and I
training
spent
at the
10 or 12
prestigious
years
Jacques
with the
Lecoq.
Pig Iron Theater Company in Philadelphia. That's really my background. And I left that company in Philadelphia in 2012 to start my own independent practice. I have no real company. I just work independently, either with friends or I instigate the projects. And my last two projects were called Home and The Object Lesson. Uh, and Home came to South Korea. Um, an old project of mine, actually, I will say, the All Wear Bowlers, a very old clown show, was at the Busan International Festival in 2006. I'm pursuing like a theater that is based on our behavior more than language and more than ideas. So I'm not very interested right now, at least, in fiction and in stories, fictional stories that have to do with characters and things like this. Um, More, I'm interested in subject matters where we can make a performance and we shed light on some very small, ordinary part of living that we normally just don't even think about. So, in my show Home, it's about how we live and the place that we live. The difference between these words, house and home. In English, I don't know what it is in South Korea, in Korean, but for us, we say house or we say home, and we use these words interchangeably, but they're really very different. And a house is a structure. It's a building, and a home is something a little more abstract. It oftentimes people, if I ask people, they will give me different definitions because they'll say, "Well, my home is something for me." It's a smell. Sometimes it's a feeling. It's they get very very abstract, even if they're not an abstract kind of person. Um, so, for instance, that's a great subject that I'm interested in, and in this show, Home, one of the things I was interested in is that for many of us, at least in the United States, I don't know what the if it's the same way um, in South Korea, but I imagine it is. We might live in an apartment or a house or something like this, and for us, it's our home. And we can't imagine necessarily that there were people who lived here before us or people who will live in that same building after us. Even if you understand that or you kind of get it, it's not something you think of day to day. You just you can only think about your life in this present moment. Uh, but you live with the decisions that those people made, the marks that they made on the building, the house, the walls, unless you change it, in which case the people after you will live with your marks and your energy too. In a way, we're always haunting spaces for people who come after us. And so I kind of imagined what would happen if all of those, if you and all of those people all were in the same building at the same time. And really at in the center of that show home, that's kind of what happens is you see time collapse and people occupying this same space over different generations. And it's like a dance. It's a dance of the ordinary. And I think it has to do with complexity and about making things that are very complicated and how we execute those things. I am somebody who, I imagine, like many people, make things too complicated. I make my life more complicated than it needs to be. And I'm always wishing I was more efficient. In life, I think it's probably best to try to be efficient. But in the theater, if you're a clown, then you have to do the opposite because we want to live in the chaos and live in the mess. I believe philosophically that life is a big mess. It's just a craziness. It's chaos. And we try to be efficient. We try to be, make a straight line, but it's really impossible. Nothing in nature is at a right angle. There's no squares. Everything is moving all over the place, but it works. And I think that's a fundamental rule of nature. And for humans, it's a lot of ego and a lot of to try to make things square, to try to make it work like clockwork. And we're really good at it. But even so, it will always fail. Nature will always do something better than people because nature kind of doesn't care. It just allows things to fall apart and come back together. We really try to not let things fall apart. And so there's something very tragic to me and hilarious, very funny in this rule. It's a scientific rule. It's the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, that things do fall apart. They just do. And they fall apart in order for them to come back together in another way. And humans really try to be rigid and stay away from that. So this is always in my shows in some way or other. So you mentioned an old show called Machines, 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 Machines. And this was a show that is made entirely of contraptions and machines that are made out of trash. They're made with strings and pulleys and levers, and we made them all ourselves. So most of them don't work very well. But in a way, what happens is the audience start to root for the machines. They start to hope that they work, and they understand the goal, and so it becomes almost like a sporting match against gravity. And of course, the failure of these machines and their futility, because they're really they're there to make your life easier, but of course, everything just makes it more and more complicated. That's really the show. Also, in that show, the world comes to an end, but that's a different story. I think the rule is a friend of mine, an old friend of mine once, when we were making actually that Machines show, we made this whole show, but we had never rehearsed because we were making machines too much. So we never actually tried anything. So then the first night in front of an audience, I mean, it was a disaster because there was really no show. And it was a real problem. And we were very depressed, my friend and I, and we had our head in our hands. And our friend said, listen, I want to tell you, there is a show in here, but you have to respect it because I think right now there's a show in the space and there's a show in your head. And right now you're trying to play the show in your head. But you should play the show that's in the space. And that show has all of these other situations, these other things going on and dynamics between you two, et cetera, et cetera. That was a really important lesson because always, you have a vision, you want something to be a certain way, but it never really is. It's always something else. And I think our job is to identify, you should try to realize your dream, but there's a moment that you have to embrace what actually you've made and let go of the thing in your head and play the play that's in the space. So that is that's my philosophical answer. I'll say one time we made a show called Elephant Room, and this show is a magic show, and it's three magicians who are sort of clowns. I mean, they're really ridiculous, sad characters. They all have fake teeth and fake mustaches and fake hair, and they are like many magicians, not you guys, but some magicians, especially in the US, that they're like from the 90s, from the 80s. They never made it to the other century, and they're stuck in the past. And these magicians are sort of pathetic, but they do great magic. So it's both funny and human at the same time. We wanted to make an elephant appear, a real elephant, like Houdini would make it disappear. We're going to make an elephant appear. It was the final gesture of this show. It's called Elephant Room. We built an entire set to facilitate this appearance. We even thought about because we couldn't really figure out how to do it with a real elephant. There was just a lot to manage, with an actual animal. But we even thought, maybe we'll have a trailer out front with fake animal smell and sound coming out of it. Just in case you walked by it, you would think, they really have an elephant. And we invested a lot of money and a lot of effort to try to build an elephant puppet that was going to fool the audience into thinking that's a real elephant. And I'm telling you, this is like 20 people working on this show, all of them adults, mostly sober, really believed that we were going to do this. And we all did the best we could, and we worked and worked and worked. And when we got everything together, there's just no way you would be fooled into thinking that was a real elephant. One person, who was the 3-year-old daughter of my friend, she I think did think it was a real elephant, but we had worked so hard, and the eyes were incredible. They had so much life in them that even though it was a ridiculous thing to have attempted, there's no way that it would have succeeded. And we were trying. For 2 days in that theater, lowering the lights and everything. Actually, we made such a strange image. The image that was there was sort of very beautiful, and in a way, kind of like our characters with the fake mustache and the fake hair and the fake teeth, where something's wrong, you just aren't sure what. So I would say that even though it was a major error, it ended up being almost more interesting than had there actually been a real elephant on that stage. This is the rule of the clown, is that you have to play the audience. You play what's happening. So that's why the clown, I think, is the baseline. That's the best discipline for any artist, because it forces you to take what's really there. In that moment that you're talking about, no, it was supposed to go in one time. I just was throw it and the string and everything, and it's supposed to be so slick, and it never worked. It was always a battle. And so I learned actually more and more how to make it, because then as I got better at it, I could probably just do it in one go and whatever, you just move on. No, there was no thing. But when it would be more and more and more crazy, the audience would really go nuts, and they would then at the end they would laugh and applaud. Well, it's very important that everybody deeply respect one another. You know, I think that's very important. And I don't mean pretend to respect. I think you have to I think it works best when you come into the room and you are like, wow, that person knows something that I don't know. They really are great. They're an expert at something I don't know. And that's also why I think it's very positive to work with different disciplines. So if I work with, my friend Stephen Dufala, for instance, who's designed a number of shows, like he's just an amazing designer. And I would never be able in a million years to design what he comes up with. And he has his own style. And I love that. I respect his brain and his abilities so much. So I think that respect is very, very, very important. And it, I think it brings us to another thing about, which is the discipline thing. I think if two people are working who are so close, I'm not sure that's always the best. If you have really the same set of expertise, something has to be a little different to create a dynamic. Something. It can be small and subtle, but you have to. That has to be kind of a big part of the relationship. So I don't know if that is a good answer to your question or not,
Okay.
but I think that collaboration is very difficult,
Mhm.
and it's a bit of a mystery as to why that works better than other times, because it doesn't always work. Yeah, actually we uh I've been very busy. I don't know, like I think maybe because the stuff that I do, it's mostly, yes, it's performance that happens in space. But I think I'm one of those artists that people like these theaters they call when they're like, we can you try this that you don't know how to do? Maybe that's interesting. Like I like to do things I don't know how to do. So since that's a natural interest of mine, I've been pretty busy. So I think I would say I've made 3 projects and then a fourth one that I'm in the middle of starting to make. And one project was just pure audio for 2 people, like no audience or anything like that. Like you and your friend would share like headphones, one head like a iPad, the things that go in your ear. Um, and that was not launched yet, so we were just working on it, but I was writing a lot for that. And it was really a good exercise because there was a lot of physical theater and magic and things like that, but I had to figure out how to be purely instructional. So it's purely about the voice in your head. Another project was done totally on Zoom. But I really love Zoom because it's a very strange format where, I mean, look, right now we're having this conversation and you're in Busan, I'm in New York, and I don't know, like we could have people from Australia and from London. You can suddenly just be there, and I think it's extraordinary. And it also is very intimate. Like in a way, we're like not even 3 feet from one another, in a funny way. For performance, usually you have to acknowledge that you're 100 feet away at least. But here, everything is happening on this very small level, a quiet level, a quiet register. So I think it's quite cool. So in the magic show that we made, we really took advantage of the Zoom. That was the Elephant Room sequel. Uh, and we took advantage of this Zoom format. And then the last thing I just made is a composition for Times Square, and I worked with a composer named Pamela Z, and it is called Times Cubed. And it's a piece. It's a music piece that we made out of interviews, like a 30-minute music piece. It just launched yesterday, actually. so people can listen to that. You can be in Times Square, but you don't have to be in Times Square. It's a very serious time, and it's a really difficult time, I think, for all of us. Where I am, where you are, and the worst part is that we can't all be together in the same space, and yet, uh, actually, in this strange way, I probably wouldn't be at your conference if it wasn't for the pandemic. In a very bizarre way, there's also a lot of coming together in unusual ways. So, despite the fact that so many people have gotten sick and so many people have died, which is, of course, the great tragedy, and in our country, avoidable, um, that there's a very sad situation in the United States this year. But that said, I think it's also is a time to find new ways, like new ways of making this exchange, new ways of making performance and performance art. You know, it will. I don't actually think that we'll ever go back to something that was. It's impossible. It doesn't mean that we won't all be in rooms together again. We will, but something it will be something new, and we have to embrace that and embrace these new constraints and not fight against them. People still need to be entertained, to be given meaning and poetry, and to laugh. I just think now is we have to, focus on the things that really matter, whatever that is to you.